This video is to illustrate how I do back paired onlays. This is a back paired onlay. It's basically a piece of red leather stuck onto a piece of blue leather. But the important thing is that the thickness, it remains the same all the way across. So in order to do that, we have to reduce the thickness on the back of the leather once this has been put on. The reason that I want it nice and flat is so particularly if it goes around a corner at the edge of a board, for example, or it goes over a joint, then it needs to be the same thickness as the backing leather, so that there's no problems with the joint opening, for example, and I don't want any lumps on the corners or on the sides of the boards. So it's an aesthetic feature and a practical function as well. You can of course just glue a piece of leather on top of another and keep it raised above it and perhaps tool around it, and that can create a nice effect, but there are times when it's not appropriate to do that as well. So it's a choice, it's an alternative way of doing things. So I'm going to show you how to do this. It requires basically an amount of dexterity and experience in working with leather, but you'll see that as we go through. The first thing I need to do is cut my pieces of leather. So I have a piece of, I think this is Hewitt's Pentland leather, and a piece of red leather which I'm going to put on top. Importantly, the onlay, which I need to cut to shape and size, has to be thinner than the background leather. That will become clear as we go later on. So whilst this may be about 0.9 mil or 1 mil thick, this needs to be perhaps about 0.5 mil thick, so I need to cut this to shape and thin it as well. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to thin it first, and then I'll be able to cut it to shape and size. The way I'm going to thin this is using a sharp fix, so I'll show you how to do that now. The first thing I have to do before putting the leather through the sharp fix is just pare the edges. So I'm just going to quickly pare the edges just of the area that I want to use. Doing this helps prevent the blade in the sharp fix from digging into the leather at the edges and cutting it in a way that you don't want it to. So it's just a safety thing really. I'll just quickly do that. There we go. So I'm just going to thin an area here. Now in the sharp fix, and of course there are other paring machines available, this basically simply holds a razor blade. There's a razor blade just here, and I simply insert the piece of leather, close it up to the thickness that I require, and pull the leather through it like so. You can see the effect. I'll just do the rest of that little piece. A bit more. Okay. So I've thinned that to the sort of thickness that I need. I can check the thickness. Yeah, it's about 0.5, so that's exactly what I need. So I'm going to cut my shape out of that part of the leather. That's fine. So I'll remove the sharp fix, get that out of the way. Just cut off that thin piece. Make sure there's no lumps or anything in there. It's nice and flat. It doesn't actually matter to some extent if it's not entirely flat, because we'll be paring the back of the finished piece anyway, so any lumps and so on will be removed. But as long as it's nice and thin, that's the main thing. You can have it thinner than that if you wish. It could be you know 3.4 if you wish. So this is going to go onto here. So I'm going to cut this to shape. Obviously you do whatever shape is necessary for your design. So I'll just do a simple angular shape, like so. Now importantly, the edges of the shape have to be pared to nothing. If you don't do that, then once it's been glued to your piece and pressed, you may still see the edge of the onlay leather, which you don't really want to do. Just need to make sure that's nice and a nice clean edge. You could do this with feathered edge leather as well, which is where the edge is uneven. It's gone so thin that you get a sort of lacy effect at the edges. It works in exactly the same way. So I'm just going to use that as my onlay, just as an example. I'm going to glue the onlay onto the base leather now. I would normally use paste, but I'm using a mixture of paste and PVA just for speed here. So plenty of glue on the back of the onlay piece. I should say, if the shape of your onlay is going to be quite delicate or small or unusual edges or whatever, what you can do is paste a piece of Japanese tissue to the front of it, to this side of it, then cut it out, and the Japanese tissue will keep it in shape as you apply it to your base leather. And then when it's dry later on, you can just remove the Japanese tissue just with a little bit of water, which is why you must use paste rather than PVA to do that. Anyway, that's gone on there. I'll position that how I want that positioned. And that needs to go in the press. Now in the press, it's quite important how we do this. This surface needs to be absolutely flat. So I'm going to put a piece of acetate or plastic or formica or something that's absolutely flat and smooth on the face of it, like so. So that's going to end up absolutely smooth. And then the back, I'm going to put some foam, and this is a piece of, actually it's an old yoga mat, I think it is, but any foam, children's modelling foam, that kind of thing, a few sheets of that would be quite useful. But any foam basically that will go on the back of your leather. And then on top of that goes another pressing board, and that then goes into the nipping press and stays in there for quite some time. It needs to be tightened really quite tight. You're pressing the onlay up into the foam behind. And I'm going to leave that there for about 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes just to ensure that the shape is going to be held. So we brought it out of the press. Let's have a look what it's like. You can immediately see there's a shape in the foam where the shape is, the onlay has compressed the foam in the centre. There we go. So that's glued on. We've got a nice flat surface there, but on the back we have a lump, and that was because that came through into the foam. So that lump is a lump that we need to take off using our paring knives. Now the paring knife I use is a French style paring knife. That's one with a curved edge to the blade, and I'm basically going to work from the centre of this lump to the outside. If you went from the outside onto it, there's a chance you could dig in and underneath the onlay, which we don't want to do. So I'll move this over to the paring stone and we'll just pare that away. We have our onlay on the base leather now, looking nice and flat. Happy with that. The edges, because they've been edge pared down to nothing, there's no sort of lip or edge, raw edge that you can see, so that's looking quite nice. So the next thing to do is to reduce the thickness behind that on the back of the leather. Now sometimes it's difficult to see exactly where the shape is, and so just by sanding it you can often get a slightly better impression. Now if you're not proficient with using a paring knife, this is an alternative way of actually thinning it. It will take quite a while. You've got to get through maybe 0.5 of a millimetre of leather, which takes longer than you might think, but you could actually sand it all the way down until you're happy with it. You just got to be patient. I use Abranet. Abranet is a great product actually. I also been on commission because I recommend it a lot actually. Useful for all sorts of things. It does clog a bit with leather, even with the coarse 80 grit Abranet, but nevertheless it's a good material and can be quite useful. But the quickest and most traditional way of doing this is to use a paring knife. Now I use a French paring knife with a curved edge, and all I'm basically doing is starting from the middle of the shape, working outwards, just to take off that additional thickness, working particularly along the edges of the shape, but always working outwards rather than inwards, so that I don't cut underneath the shape. And very quickly you'll start to see the shape appearing. Now you notice how flat the blade is when I'm doing this. I don't want to dig into it. I'm merely taking off shavings from the top. Now you can use a spoke shave to do this. If you're proficient with using an English paring knife, that's also possible, but I find this more straightforward, less liable to problems. And it's just a question of working away at it. The only way to tell whether you've pared enough really is to feel it, and just feel along the edges. Actually that's not too bad, we're getting there already I think. And just to feel what it feels like, and you're trying to get a flat, or pretty flat surface so there's no lump at the edge, and you just keep on paring until you get that. Feels okay, and turn it over. Yeah, that feels good. I'm happy with a little bit there maybe. Let me just do that a little bit. Yeah, nice and flat. That's what we're after. And that's your back pared onlay.